What's that?
Everybody's taken care of.
I told him they need
Add that to that
to
list.
get these things cleaned up
Yeah.
down here.
Alonda's gonna help me with a lot of stuff.
That's not left
I wanna
over
sit
from
right
Bug,
here.
is it?
He's real
Keep
good.
these two straight.
Thank you. That's right. He's real good at.
All right, good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. I'm pleased that some of you that were here last week have decided to return.
Gluttons for punishment.
Gluttons for punishment. I was telling Dan, and I think I told Trey, that when I was teaching, I taught English and history, and because that's my subjects, and so. But then I decided when I got a job teaching that was a good thing, because those were required classes and students could not refuse to.
You like a captured audience.
You know, if I had taught elective classes, you'd have to cater to their whims, and but anyway. But I am glad that you came back, and I hope there was something last week that we did that at least caused you to think about what a Presbyterian is and why we're Presbyterians and how we're going to get there and why we're there and whatever. So this week, we dealt with the Reformation last week, and this week we're going to continue on with just a little bit before we get down to really where the Presbyterians begin to gel, and that's the way my take on it is that after the Reformation there were a lot of different ideas going around Reformed. But what is a Presbyterian? Well, first of all, it's not theology. Now that's my take on it. Now Dan and Trey could do. It's really it's polity. It's an organization. It's how it's organized. It's we take our theology from somewhere else. So the Presbyterian is church, or the Presbyterian organization is how we chose to organize, or how it was chosen to organize. So Reformed, I'm big on words here about definitions. It was changed. So something changed. Theology, the study of God and religious beliefs, that's what changed. Was how the approach to the study of God and religious belief and how you communicate that to folks. And then the polity is the organized system of how a certain group of people decided this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to run our organization. And then it's going to be run and led by presbyters, which are elders. So what you got is a changed study of God and religious beliefs in a church led by elders. And that's, if I'm not wrong, that's what the Presbyterian church is. When you say you're a Presbyterian, you're talking about how the church, we're a Reformed church. We're a Reformed church. Now, there's lots of Reformed churches, and then when you get different people in on it, then all those ideas come, and then that's where the details begin to get fuzzy with some folks. You can have Miss Sarah can read the Bible. She can read a verse, and she can interpret it the way that she feels led to interpret it. Susan can read the same verse and maybe feel a different interpretation of it. And so that's kind of what happened to get us to that. So we're still trying to gel as a Presbyterian church, if we want to call it that.
Can I interject, teacher,
Yes.
just for a moment?
Yes.
A lot of Presbyterians, we like to use that phrase or slogan, reformed and always reforming.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, that was something that I ran into early on when I came to the Presbyterian church. I said, "Well, are you never going to get finished? And are you never going to get there?" And if you remember last week, we had a beginning, we had a middle, but we haven't had the end yet. We're still headed toward the end, and we will. The end is always changing, or the way we get there is always changing. Or back to the Reformation, to kind of decide when we kind of gelled. we talked about the Reformation starting in the 1500s. We got Calvin, and then we got the Church of England. And this over here is where things begin to really get kind of all tore up. Because over here we had a revolution. We cut a king's head off. In England, we did all of that, and they did. And then they did away with the monarchy. And a lot of this wasn't caused necessarily by religion, but religion was a big part in it. The Catholics and the Protestants had just had problems, and the Puritans came in. They developed because they were going to purify the Church of England, okay? And you actually had an English Presbyterians all the time over this was happening. John Knox was a student of Calvin. He was from Scotland, and if you ever hear the Kirk of Scotland, that's the Church of Scotland, because the word Kirk means church in Scotland, in Scottish. And so this was a national church. It was decided this was a national church. And then, so you had these and you had these, and they began to get in the middle 1600s, and somewhere along the way, you begin to see a Reformed Presbyterian church begin to gel. Is that a fair statement? Okay. And go back up here. They cut off Charles the First head, the king. Then they had a commonwealth run by Oliver Cromwell, and then they brought back a grandson to be a king of the one they cut the head off, and then they threw him out and got a daughter of James II. They got him and her back in and took her husband, William I, who was from William of Orange, yeah. And they ruled together. All of this was trying to cement the Protestant way of religion in England, and then that had an effect over all of this. And it will make rulers begin to think that they might need to listen to someone if they're willing to cut somebody's head off, or if they're willing to depose someone. But also, in this, the Puritans did, or some of the groups did exactly what had been done to them. They persecuted Catholics. The Catholics had persecuted and I'm not saying that to be derogatory about any church. It's just what happened. It went back in the time of Rome, persecuted Christians. So everybody, somewhere along the line, when somebody gets in power, and if it goes too far, somebody's going to be persecuted. Someone's going to be persecuted. That's not the way God intended it, but you remember, this is what humans are doing a lot of times. Under the guise of trying to find what God wants us to do. That's a very easy thing for some people to use. I'm doing this because this is what God told me to do. Well, God has not told everyone to do the things that they claim that they've been told to do. It's just not. It's just not. I don't think. Okay, so we begin to gel. That jello is begin to harden right there, okay? Okay. And out of all of this comes something that the Parliament in England decided to establish, or decided to organize, what is called the Westminster Assembly. And this is an assembly of 150 so ministers, divines, lay people, commissioners from Scotland, to come together to try to, because what the Church of England and the Presbyterians in Scotland, they weren't on the same page. Some of the same page, but not the same page. Let's see if it's on my the Presbyterian organization is a horizontal organization. We're a church of all priests. We've heard that used before. We're all priests. We're all responsible for spreading the word. We're all responsible for helping one another. We're all responsible for teaching one another. That's when we had the baptism last week. We're responsible. As other members, we're responsible. And so we're a horizontal church. A horizontal church. We don't have high leaders. Well, now we have the Presbyterian and all that, but we don't have somebody way up here and somebody way down here. Now, the Church of England, much like the Catholic Church, was an Episcopal church. Bishops, other church people here. So it was a top down. If anything, Presbyterian church, if it has to be, we're a bottom up to that level. We don't have somebody up here besides God and besides Christ. We don't have anybody up here. We're all here and we're responsible. So anyway, this pop the button. So anyway, this Westminster Assembly, and named that because it met in Westminster Hall in England, and they met for around 6 years to do this to try to bring together the ideas, and out of that came the Westminster Confession, the Westminster Catechism, larger and shorter. Why they said shorter and larger, why they didn't say longer and shorter or something like that. But anyway, how many of you have read those? How many of you have read those? Okay. Book of Confessions. The Westminster Confession, like all confessions, it may confuse us but we're confessing or we're professing what we believe. Okay, just like we do on Sunday when we do one of the confessions on Sunday. And so it was written. But what is more interesting to me is these catechisms. Now we often think about that related to the Catholic Church, but all it is a question and answer format to teach things. So if you do when I was teaching, if I did a question and answer sheet to give to my students, and I said, here are the questions, you find the answers. Well, in a way, that was a catechism. So it's nothing unusual, it's just that, in that format. Now, so that's what it is. And in the shorter catechism, I forget how many questions they are, but it's shorter than the large one, and essentially does the same thing. But when I was trying to determine if I was going to be a member or I was going to join the Presbyterian Church here at Westminster, I asked John McHale, I said, I got to know about some of this stuff because, I've read the Bible and I've listened to preachers all my life and all that, and I just need to know more. Well, as I think I mentioned last week, one of the things he gave me to read was the Institutes, Calvin's Institutes, which that's, I read part of them and thumbed through and quick read and whatever. And of course that, not knowing what I needed to know, that didn't tell me everything I probably would have liked to have known. But he gave me a book of confessions. Now this is not it, but he gave me a book of confessions, and I went through that and read those. It helped me to realize, yes, I believe this. I believe this. I believe this. I need to know more about it, but I believe this. So if you haven't ever read the catechisms and whatever. It's got the answers for you. It's kind of like, you don't have to find the answers. It's got the answers right there. So you don't have to, you might want to keep the Bible close by, but you don't have to. So this is, every once in a while I'll pick this up and reread because I say, I need to be refortified.
Do we have,
Yes.
Susan, any copies of those in the library, or?
Yeah, we have a few.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can probably, yes ma'am.
Well, okay, when I grew up in the Presbyterian church.
Mhm.
And when I was a teenager, and usually it happened when you were about 13, you went to catechism.
Right, yeah.
And so we used the shorter one, I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
And I think the first question is something about what is your purpose?
Chief
In life.
end, yeah, what is your chief end? Yeah.
Is to glorify God.
Yeah. What is the chief end? This is the shorter. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and then to enjoy Him forever.
Right.
Enjoy,
Okay.
I mean, that is not glorify God and be scared of Him forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Glorify
yeah.
God and enjoy
Yeah.
Him forever, that,
Right, it's beautiful.
so, that should get a few of us Presbyterians moving a little bit more in our
Yeah.
city.
The second question is, and I'll go through all of these. The second question is, what rule hath God given to direct us how we may glorify and enjoy Him? The answer is, the Word of God, which is contained in the Scriptures of the Old and New Testaments, is the only rule to direct us how we may glorify and enjoy Him.
That's
So-
the Reformation right there, because the Reformation fought over sola scriptura,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
the Scripture plus the church plus the interpretation of the bishop.
So-
that they really begin at the beginning
They-
on both of those, don't they?
They do that, and I just, so it sounds like, if you haven't read those or haven't got a copy, I'm pretty sure you can find them online. I'm pretty sure. I don't think
Well, we
they're
can order, we
copyrighted.
ordered actually some more recently too in the office, but yeah, we can.
But I mean, you don't have to have this whole book of confession because it has all the confessions, the Heidelberg Catechism, all that. But the Westminster ones are the ones that I thought, I mean, that just, talking about the Presbyterian Church gelling, that gels me, okay? That gels me. That's a quick reference, I might not have time or want to take the time to sit down on a Sunday afternoon and read through the complete Bible. But on an afternoon, I can pick up those and read through those. That in itself, when you read those, that in itself is a lesson. That in itself is a sermon. Not to try to put the ministers out of business, but that in itself, that in itself is a sermon. So,
Bill,
yes.
And I also have a story that was formative in my life, and I'm sure some of you will identify with this, but I grew up in a family. We had a huge family, and we're not very well-to-do, and I was ashamed to go to church because my socks didn't always match my coat, and most of the time I didn't have a sport coat, so we kind of fell in very early. My parents were working all the time, so we didn't go to church very often, except my mother would have moments of conversion around Easter and Christmas, and that's when we would go.
Mhm.
But in any case, when my brother and I, who was 1 year younger, when we turned, I turned 13 and he turned 12, the associate minister came to our house. It was the first time I'd ever seen a minister in my home. And he said, it's time for your two boys to go to their catechism. And so for the next 8-10 weeks, we went up to the church and they'd let us play basketball. And then we would go in for an hour and a half, and we would learn that catechism. And I look back on those years and I think to myself, the other lesson in this is that there's a reason for those confessions. This is something you have to share with the world. And they went out of their way with a relatively poor, modest, insignificant, working class family. And they went out of their way to say, hey, come on in, and we're gonna teach you your faith. And the interesting thing was when one of my grandsons turned 12, I said right before we went on a family vacation in the summer, I said, would you like to hear about the Lord? and I brought a catechism along. And you know what his response was? He said, yes, I want to hear about the Lord. So you know, this is not just something you teach to other people. This is a dynamic confession of where joy and holiness and service and our humanity comes from. This is important stuff. And we have got to reach out to make that work. And we all need to be teachers in that regard, don't we, Bill?
Yeah, and what you know, I could read, you know, and I went to church when growing up as a young person. I went mainly to Baptist churches for a long time because that's what my grandparents were on one side. And if you were at and she didn't go every Sunday, but if my grandmother was going to church and you were at her house, guess what? You were going to church too. And we went to an old country church, and sometimes she went to a Methodist church. You know, she wanted to go over there because it was closer to some folks she wanted to visit with that Sunday afternoon. So you go to the Methodist church, you go to the Baptist church. Her favorite thing when she took grandkids is that it was an old country church, and the preacher was not bound by an hour's time. And especially if it was a Baptist preacher, you know. And but she took a pack of saltine crackers, you know, a tube of saltine crackers, and she didn't have a thermos. She took a quart jar and put some ice in it and put some water in it and wrapped it in some plastic and then wrapped it in some paper bags and to keep it. And if you were a grandchild if you were a grandchild, you were going to be on the pew with her, within reach. Within reach. And so when you got fidgety, she'd shove you a cracker, some crackers, and some water to drink, and that was to calm you down and to remind you that this is, you know. And but then, so I went to church, and then I grew up in the Methodist church because that's where my mother's folks went, and went there, went through all my. But in all of that time, and maybe I just didn't ever ask anybody. Maybe I just didn't ask anybody. You know. I went to Sunday school class, but we did a lot of coloring, you know, which is okay as you're younger. And in teenagers, we did a lot of other things. But as an adult, the catechism taught me a lot of what I needed to know. All right, so this began to gel again. So now, and we use this, and the church in Scotland, the Presbyterian church in Scotland, they adopted this. So see, you begin to see people coming together, and then this next week I'm going to give you something to take home with you, and it blew my mind because I can just remember how many committee meetings do they have to do what they're about to do in America. You know. But anyway, so we have these beginning, and here, and this is what's called, and I've left off some, and so I probably will offend somebody if they're watching. But we had the Catholic and the Orthodox Church. They split. You know, we told about that other day. You know, back in 10-something. You know, they had and then we had the Reformation. And out of the Reformation came a lot of these. The Congregationalists, which we'll find a lot of those came in the United States. You'll find them in New England. Okay, Anglicans in America, the Episcopal Church. And they've had us kind of a split in the last few years. And some of them are calling themselves Anglicans, and some of them are calling themselves Episcopals. And then, you know, so it's, you know, so I got a joke, but I'm not going to tell it because we're online. But Puritans, you know, we go back to England again. Baptist, Anabaptist, Presbyterians, and Methodist. And you could go on and on and on. But in all of these churches, All of them. All are churches with Christ at the head and at the center. Okay? All of them. As I told someone, I've been to a lot of churches in my several years, visited. Just because if somebody asks me to go, I'll go visit with them, you know. If they're friends, I'll go visit with them. And I've never been to a church of any denomination that I didn't find that God was there, if you look hard enough. And sometimes you don't have to look hard at all. So, you know, I'm not offended when I go to one of these and they say something that I don't truly think it's that way. I'm not offended. I'm not offended. You know, that's their right to believe that way.
And even layering on top of that, within the PCUSA itself, you'll find that in our book of confessions, we actually have multiple confessions. So, of course, we come out of the Westminster, and as you begin comparing and contrasting those confessions, not that you need to, but those confessions are in conflict from time to time, which is a very interesting statement made implicitly, and that is that to be a member in a PCUSA church isn't to agree on every little detail of theology with the person sitting next to you. Yeah. It's about as Christ reveals to us what it is that we ought to be doing in the world. I mean, there's confessions, just real briefly, talk about modern confessions that you find in our confession. But, the Theological Declaration of Barmen, which, talks about, it was condemning any minister's engagement with Nazi Germany. Confession of 1967 on racial reconciliation. Confession, basically, I would argue that the PCUSA might be this is going to sound real arrogant, it might be, but I think that the PCUSA is the only Presbyterian tradition that has taken the and always reforming seriously. Mm-hmm. Reformed and always reforming. At some point, it seems that other branches got confused being biblical with being traditional. And that's the part I think.
And as I was trying to find my long way to a church, and as I say this, I was 47 years old when I was baptized. 47. I used to say I was ashamed to have waited that long. I'm just glad I got there. But 47 years old, and something that I missed all of those 47 years, or how many years it was that I was responsible, was I always thought, well, this is what this church says. And this is what this church says. And this is what this church says. Well, somewhere along the way, if I keep reading about what this church says, believes, requires, I'm going to find something that I disagree with. My thought of error was I had to agree with every one of those. So if I ever found one I couldn't agree with, fine, I can't join that church. Or that church doesn't want me. I would think I can't be a good member. But that's not true.
That's right.
Because remember, we're all sinners. We're all sinners. And part of that sin might be that I'm just wrong about that thing that I don't agree with.
Or it could be that the committee that drew up the confession, that they were the
Yeah. Because we had to remember, all of this was spiritually led, but the people that were being led were humans. And humans make errors. Humans make errors. All right, all right, I've already said this about Presbyterian Episcopal horizontal. So just remember, we're horizontal. We might have a bump, but we're horizontal. A bump might be the Presbyterian, and often is. But here, I mentioned this the first day. Are you a Christian Presbyterian? Are you a Presbyterian Christian? You got to decide. Which is it? Is the glass half empty or is it half full? I think I'm a Presbyterian Christian because this is describes, but this is the noun, which is the important. But I could also be a Christian Presbyterian. I would hope if you're a Presbyterian that you're a Christian Presbyterian. So it's kind of like you've got to think about this. Half full, half empty. And then the final thing, because we're close, and I mentioned this, why are you in the Presbyterian Church? How did you get to the Presbyterian Church? And when did you get to the Presbyterian That's only something that you can answer. So now we're Presbyterian and we're going to America next week. Okay? We're leaving England, and I'm giving you some homework.
Oh.
But it's nothing you have to write. If you just take one of these and pass it around. This is a Presbyterian history chart that I found several years ago in whatever, and I'm sure it's been out there. This is the Presbyterian family connections. And all I want you to do for your homework is take a glance at that, and because it's just almost too much to talk about at one time, and we're not going to spend all next week on that. But you can see pretty much back over here when the first Presbyterian was organized in America, pretty much took shape. And then can you imagine how many committee meetings it took in these different denominations or these different branches to get to over here? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? You see the Cumberland and what? So this up here leads to the PCUSA, but you see you have other branches of the Presbyterian family that continue on. All of it is not directed just to the PCUSA. There's the Cumberland Presbyterian. There's the second Cumberland Presbyterian. I didn't even know that existed. You know, it's like the First National Bank and the Second National Bank. And then there's the Third National Bank, you know. And, it's kind of like that, you know. So this is, just look at this as we begin to talk about some of this. And some of this we won't touch on. But you can just see and how they melded into one. You know, the Civil War in the United States caused the split in the Presbyterian Church, mainly over slavery. Were you going to believe in slavery? Were you going to, or were you going to be against slavery? So that's what that does. Any questions today? Any comments? I'm just proud to be a Presbyterian Christian. Okay. And if I can, and I probably will get in trouble over this, I think what I really am is a Presbyterian, is a member of the Presbyterian Church of Christ. If you think about that, if all churches are Christ-led, then the Presbyterian Church is Christ-led. So aren't you a member of Christ Church? We just happen to go to a church that is organized in a Presbyterian manner and believe some of the things that they said. Now, with the other book, and I know that you might want to read sometimes, but it's not near as exciting as this one, is the Book of Order. Okay? This has got all the rules in it. And these two together are called the Constitution of the PCUSA. PCUSA. Can you imagine how many committee meetings it took? All right, next week we're coming to America. Okay.
Thank you.
And anything I said that upset anybody, I apologize.
Leave a comment card.